Live. Hello, everybody. This is Tech Z at Etherforce, and I'm here with the great and mighty, the granddaddy of alternative science and alchemy. He's a young guy, but this guy's been at the root of everything for the past 30 years. Some of the top names now we would never have even heard of if it wasn't for Thomas Joseph Brown, and I'm honored to have him here. So he's coming to us live from New Zealand. Thomas Joseph Brown, looking as pretty as ever. How are
Hey,
you,
thanks,
brother?
Beck. I'm doing fine, thanks. Now it's good to catch up and have a chat here. Nice to learn this technology and use it to, bring forward good ideas for other people to use and learn from.
Well, the
So,
most important thing is we have you here.
uh, yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the granddaddy of all that stuff, but I got to hang out with everybody that was in the field, so I learned a lot. I got to see a lot. Um,
Yeah, Manly Free Hall came to you for books, right?
well, it was through the mail, but I did sell him books. I thought about keeping the check, but it was for a couple $100, so I thought I'd cash it. But it showed he was interested in Borderland. I can't remember what it was because that was 25 years ago. But it was probably some radionics and books and things like that. So it showed even at that age, he was still out there looking around, seeing what was happening.
Yeah, definitely.
And I like Manley's work, and I've been through his like Secret Teachings of All Ages, and it's a font of knowledge, but still didn't give me the keys I was looking for. It was some amazing stuff in there, and I'm not knocking it in that sense. But I found, books like Man or Matter, found really in Rudolf Steiner's work a much higher order functioning that I didn't find. It might have been in Manly Halls. Maybe I just didn't see it in the way he presented it. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not knocking it because that kind of comes from the traditional true Masonic background where there is no like personal God outside. We're just dealing with it's an impersonal universe. The divine force manifests consciously through us, and we build that through the initiatory process. Is like building the temple inside us, which is why the Masons built the grand temples like the Gothic cathedrals outside. That was only mirroring, our inner relation to the cosmos. And of course, and on top of that, it was discovered that like the old Gothic cathedrals of northern France are actually built in the pattern on the ground of the constellation of Virgo. So there's a lot more to all that. But like I say, while I enjoyed Manley's work and the true font of knowledge, and I still look through it, I found better paths to what I was looking for, in my search, for what I call cosmic orientation.
And I have to say, that's what I love about you, Mr. Brown, Tom, is that when I read all these books, especially by these German dudes, like they never just come out and say anything. Like no one in this scene, in the quote unquote occult scene, ever comes out and says anything. So I really appreciate your style, which is uniquely American. You want to lay it all on the table, and we appreciate that.
With respect for the German thinkers, because
Oh,
there was
definitely.
some of them that it was that. But you're right. You have to sort of fathom through their stuff. But at least they gave you a precise ordering of things often. Although it's funny because because one of my mentors was Trevor Constable, and one of his mentors was this man named Rick Mansell. And Rick worked in the he was a specialist in camouflage. Worked in the war room in London during the Second World War. And it was through camouflage that he actually got into Rudolf Steiner's work, through Goethean color theory. And Rick retired to the States and spent like the last 25 years of his life recording, retranslating Steiner's works. So most of his stuff was never published, but I mean I've listened to hundreds of the translation tapes, because Trevor turned me on to the people who were doing them, and unfortunately they're not really available anymore. But it was funny because Rick, these were just his raw translation tapes, and in the middle of it, he'd be reading something. He goes, God. He goes, wow, these bloody Germans. He says they make things so complicated. He goes, here's what Steiner's trying to say, right?
Oh my goodness.
And it was funny when I first got on the internet back 95, 96, and I found this anthroposophical science thing, and I go, great. So I get on there and start like putting some ideas, and people are going on about relativity. I'm going, yeah, well, look, like Steiner said relativity was nonsense, and people go, no, he didn't say that. I go, yeah, right here, and I quoted it. They go, yeah, but that was an unauthorized translation.
How many ways can you say nonsense in German? I don't know.
So the thing is it's hard to actually you can transmit ideas with words, but in essence, when you start transmitting ideas and you can transmit a collection of ideas, then there's these higher order functions of mind that are transmitted. And this took me a while, like in Steiner's work, knowledge and attainment, knowledge of the higher worlds and its attainment. It's not their attainment, it's not attainment of the higher worlds, it's knowledge of the higher worlds. And I tell you, I didn't figure it out from his book. I read through it a couple times and thought, it was like, I remember when I was young, a friend of mine was into Hare Krishnas, and he came up with this book, Easy Journey to Other Planets. And I read it through, I'm thinking, I must have missed something. So I read it through again, I go, there's nothing in here. The book doesn't reflect the title. And I mean, Steiner's stuff was much better than that. But I didn't attain it. I didn't figure out what he was talking about except through my own process of managing at Borderlands Sciences and going through. I always credit Trevor Constable with putting me on the right track through his book Cosmic Pulse of Life, which when I read that, and then he put me on to Man or Matter, which is what inspired him. And what that does is that teaches you how to think in archetypal structures. So it's not so much that it's a fact base, that this fact brings you to this point, or this fact brings you to this point. It's that observance of facts process, the fact of things processing in nature gives you a higher order perception that you can't necessarily put down like on a graph. There's not like a quantitative analysis of higher worlds. It's a qualitative understanding of processes. And that's why I say that may have been in Manly Hall's work. The way I read it through, maybe because I didn't go through the Masonic initiatory processes, it didn't have the same integration into my being as it may have had I done so. But nonetheless, I mean, I found the knowledge of the higher worlds to be actually very easily attainable if you follow a certain process of thought.
I think the fact that you didn't go through the Masonic initiatory process works in our favor. We get a much purer.
I was invited a couple times, but I guess I didn't have the right attitude. A friend in Chicago, he was a 32nd degree Mason, and he invited me in, and I said, "What's the story? You guys taking over the world?" He said, "Man," he said, "most of these guys are, drink too much. They couldn't plot their way out of a paper bag." But then again, we know that's. But I just was never a joiner. I like the idea of building the temple in the body, but I didn't like the idea of having to join something to do it and pay dues and learn secret handshakes and all that. And I've known people. And I was invited here as well in New Zealand. I was invited to be in the Masons, and I sort of made a joke about if that would help me get off speeding tickets. And I think that the person who asked me, it was an elderly neighbor. I was in his house chatting with him, and I noticed he had a picture of him in like full regalia up on the wall. And so he invited me, and I said, "Does it help with speeding tickets?" He's going, "I don't think you're the right material for this stuff." But nonetheless, I think within that there is a core of truth to that. Because the old Masons, the whole idea of that was to transmit, the proper knowledge of how to build things. And I say it wasn't just stonemasonry. Those temples were built connecting earth and sky. They were radionic instruments. So if we look at like in the modern day, like what we'd look at like Albert Abrams or Ruth Drown, I would use like Ruth Drown's 9-dial radionic device. In essence, that's sort of like a tunable Gothic cathedral. To connect heaven and earth with the human in between and bring balance in. So, again, radionics, it's not the equipment that does it, it's the structure and your knowledge and use of it that brings you forward in that. because there was a lot of confusion with that and, let's say, like psychotronics. And I was even briefly on the board of the U.S. Psychotronics Association. I think they put me on for window dressing, but I didn't work too well there either. And I was already managing Borderlands. But that's what a lot of people say with radionics. It's your intention, and it's truly not. Ruth Drown warned her students not to allow their intentions to interfere with the true radionic process, which was a structural energy. So if you look at, like, let's look at basic form, pyramid energy. We know that a model of the Cheops pyramid will, it'll dry cheese, without molding. I've done all kinds of experiments. I even shaved for a couple of years with a razor that I kept in a pyramid when I was younger.
Wow.
So we know that. So it doesn't matter what your intention is, the structure is doing it.
So
And
it works
true
regardless of what your intention is.
Exactly. So true radionics works on that principle. The imprinting of intention and your psychic abilities into the equipment is psychotronics. That's actually a different thing. It's sort of Ruth Drown said that humanity wasn't responsible or ready enough to actually take that stage. So whether or not we are, and some people may well be, because I've met some amazing, the pure and clear radionics operators in this lifetime, and I believe there are probably people that can do that, but the point made in understanding what she said is that there is a distinction between the two. And I think that's a lot of what's lost in the alternative science fields is people get a little idea. They know something's wrong with reality, or with the version of reality that we're all given, what we can call consensus reality. And the first sort of little opening that they find that shows them the larger picture, that almost becomes their new meme. And then they try to, like, order everything around that, rather than just taking that as, like, the first step on a larger path. Yeah, I guess what I was trying to say there is that you have to keep your mind open to all the ideas that are out there, not just take one and do it. Like, somebody will be like, in the free energy field years ago, I don't keep up on it as much as I used to. But I mean, some people, it was tachyon energy, and other people, it was 0-point energy, right? And if you didn't use, like, the right term, you weren't in that camp.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, it doesn't. And the thing is, I didn't care what people called the energy. We were just trying to get people to understand what the archetypal structure of reality is. Charles Fort said that it will steam engine when it's steam engine time. Meaning that things develop at the right point in time. So yeah, I guess we just have to see how this technology develops. But in order for, and there is a lot of amazing inventions going on. There's a lot of people working, and so what I'm saying, I don't mean to, and I'm not denigrating anybody's work. I respect everybody that's out there trying to do everything. It's just that I'd like to see it all fit into a larger picture, and people start using a more collective understanding.
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why I have so much respect for you and your work, because not only are you a leader, but you're also a synthesizer, and you have a very, very broad perspective on, which is absolutely essential if we're really going to master control of the etheric forces in a spiritually responsible way.
Absolutely. And that's why I find from all the systems I went through, what I found to be the pure archetype is the Goethen color theory.
Oh, wow.
Which I learned from basically through Trevor Constable. He didn't really present it in Cosmic Pulse of Life, which was kind of surprising. He actually, there was in his a paperback version called Living Sky Creatures. No, that was a different one. I forget which particular book that was in. But since he turned me on to Man or Matter, that really covers the Goethean optics, and that blew me away. Because
Absolutely.
once you understand that, you realize that the electromagnet, I already had problems with the electromagnetic spectrum as a fundamental concept. But that just totally destroyed it in my mind.
So
And
just to recap for people, um, Man or Matter is a book written by Ernest Lairs, who's a student of Rudolf Steiner, correct?
Correct. Yeah, here is, I believe he was involved with the scientific teaching through the Waldorf schools. This
Absolutely.
is third edition. The second edition is available online at a number of places. I have it on borderlandsciences.com, and we can put it up on Etherforce as well if you'd like. Just so,
And you very
this.
kindly provided an audio tape version as well of the second edition, which was much appreciated. So,
Right. I haven't released that yet, but I will soon, only because there's a few little things because it's mechanically read.
yeah,
And there's little things like when they're talking about gases, because just the way that you spell it, it sounds like gases and things like that. So there's a few little corrections I've been going through making, so it's easier to listen to.
yeah,
So that will be released, and we can put that on, both Borderland Sciences as well as the Etherforce sites. Just
yeah.
the whole point
So,
is to make it available for people.
yeah, so this call goes out to everyone who's listening. If you guys, anyone who wants to actually read out the third edition, like you can just get it, order online. It's not that expensive, and read it out. Give that as a gift to the world. Please do. I might actually do it, but it's such an amazing book. I think it really does deserve it. Like the book covers so many topics from electromagnetism to light to just the spiritual situation that we're in. Can you give us a broad perspective on what to
Oh,
expect
yeah,
from it?
exactly. Well, I think one of the fundamental things that Layers gets into from the inception is like dynamics versus kinetics. It's like all of modern science based on like Newton's laws of motion. You push something, it's going to keep on going until you're done pushing it, right? And hey, you know what? I was even watching something on Newton the other day because I always watch documentaries, and they're showing this like beautiful tree, and they're like dropping an apple out of it. And this enlightened like Newton, right? The apple dropping. Well, how in the hell did the tree get up there in the first place? They're not even thinking about these forces. They're thinking, and that's what Jerry Vassilatos used to say. He said, modern science, all it does is it's discovering the properties of inertialistic matter. So in matter, what Ernst Slayers discusses is basically what he calls magical versus mechanical motion. So even let's look at our hand, right? Because you can think to move your hand, right? There's no mechanical motion from your mind to your hand, but yet the muscles then contract and move the skeleton. So the muscles are mechanically, so there's two types of action. You have your magical, which were from the true sense of that, which is the consciousness moving things. And then you have the mechanical, which is the muscles actually moving the bones, which then can perform functions out here in space. You can pick things up and move them and do things. So it's hard to really grasp that just being told that in a simple form. But as you read through and see the development of ideas and how science sort of developed over the last 300 to 400 years, and where errors of thought were made and real profound thinkers were overlooked because people didn't really get what they were saying at the time. So it was really, I think the basis of it all comes out of Goethe's work. A lot of people just know Goethe as the man that wrote Faust. It's a great German sort of poet philosopher, but he was actually an incredible scientist. And when it comes to his color theory, like he believed Newton, right? Because he heard about it, right? And he just figured, well, scientists, they're right, Um,
Would
so he
you
borrowed a. Go
would you
ahead.
call Goethe a poet first or a scientist first?
They should be the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the modern English language is inadequate to form descriptors for those types of people. He's like Trevor Constable said, genius. He said that's misused. He says, that's like Hollywood flex. That turn out like movies are called geniuses and stuff. But I like Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer said, genius is an eminently clear consciousness of things in general. And I
Absolutely.
can say that's where Goethe was coming from. But anyway, Goethe got a prism from an associate, and which were very rare in those days, a few hundred years ago. And he didn't get around to it because he was involved in, I believe, his morphological study of plants, which led to his Metamorphoses of Plants writings. And anyways, this guy sent a messenger to pick the prism up. So Goethe figured, well, it's going out the door. Might as well have a look through it. And he took a look through it, And he looked at a white wall, and he was expecting to see 7 colors on the wall, right? That's what Newton said, right? Prism breaks, slide into 7 colors. And he didn't. All he saw was like a little color fringe at the top and at the bottom of the white wall. And he knew instantly, because he had an eminently clear consciousness of things in general, that Newton was wrong. And that's what started his optical stuff. Of course, the prism didn't leave. He kept it and started his study of optics. And this is really basic stuff. I mean, if you go to like Google Images and search for images of spectra, prismatic spectra and stuff, you'll find all kinds of pictures from science books that are in error and show 7 colors coming out of a prism. But some of them will show it correctly, but most of them don't. Most of them are kind of like, I call it the Pink Floyd, right? We know they're musicians, not scientists, right? But the dark side of the moon, they've got the white light going in one side and the 7 colors coming out. That's not what happens in a prism. What comes out is 2 color bands, red, yellow, and blue, violet, because the light's coming through a slit. So when the light comes through the slit, let's say you've got red in the black, yellow in the white, blue in the white, violet in the black. You bring them together, you get green. Pull them apart, no green. The green never appears right by the prism. It's always at a point away, depending on the geometric relationship of the 2 slits. But if you reverse that situation, and rather than running light through a slit, you run light around an object, and you have, so you reverse the borders. So you get your yellow in the white, red in the black, violet in the black, and blue in the white. You bring those together, you get magenta in the middle. And that's what Goethe actually said, well, green, he saw green and magenta as a secondary polarity to the primary polarity of the red, yellow, blue, violet bands. And they said, green was kind of material moving, and the magenta was more spiritual, moving towards the spiritual. Now this was reflected in work. Oh, great! We can put these pictures up. So this was reflected in the work of Dinshaw-Gattiali, the spectrochrome system. And are we seeing this on the live feed here, Tech? I've lost your audio, so I'll keep on talking. Right, so we see here on this diagram, we've got on the left the yellow, red, and okay. I'm not hearing you.
You can also share your screen. Just click the little left. On the left, there's a green button saying screen share, and then you can click what you want to show. So I'm showing this right now. You can also share with your screen as well.
Okay. Let me just figure out.
So you can keep talking, and I'll try to match it to what you're saying. But
yeah, I don't actually have my image bank on the computer at the moment, so
no problem. I'll keep it from here. I'll put up some of Dinshaw's stuff.
Yeah. So this is a Dinshaw-Gattiali spectrochrome system, which I studied for many years with his son Sarosh, who was actually a Borderlands accountant for about 5 years. And I was amazed when I found Dinshaw's work. It blew me away. But I was really amazed because I found this after Goethe's work, and I was truly amazed that Dinshaw still believed in Newton, a tireless defender of Newton, even though his work shows that the Newtonian system would be wrong. So again, on there we've got green on the top, magenta on the bottom. Dinshaw said that green and magenta had the same wavelength, but rotated in opposite directions in the ether. Now, we've actually done some spectrographic analysis of old Dinshaw-tuned glass from a spectrochrome, and we won't get into too much detail on that right here because I don't have the graphs. But I believe we're actually getting to the point where we'll be able to prove this. So color has a wavelength. Doesn't mean it is a wavelength. In a sense, we could almost call it like the timbre of a musical instrument, because you can have same frequency, but it can sound completely different depending on what instrument it's coming out of. But nonetheless, here we see, the red, yellow, blue, violet sides. And we can bring this back one step. We can walk outside every day, unless there's clouds, and we can see exactly what's happening. You see the yellow sun moving across the blue sky. So orthodoxy will tell you that Right. Well, the blue is just scattering of light. Just a secondary effect. But if you look at it sort of through the Goethean eyes, what you see is two types of light. You see transverse and longitudinal transmissions imaging on the planetary atmosphere. And there's your primary archetype for all energy systems. It's right in front of us every day. And also there's your wave-particle duality for the quantum physicists that are like stuck beneath matter, smashing atoms and stuff. Because the secrets are always right in front of us all the time. And maybe on another show we'll even go into that and show how that actually relates to like the Vajrayana mandala, the Dahani Buddhas, which I've put into some of my video work. Right, so we have this spectrum here, and you can definitely do this. But there's other way you can also project other spectrums too. You can project the reverse spectrum, which I've done. And so there's a lot to it. I remember I was reading through one of Dinshaw's trials, 1,000 years ahead, because he went through a number of trials where the government was trying to shut him down for his work. And he basically, I'm trying to remember, I can't remember, it was Luckish or one of these experts from General Electric or Kodak or something that he was like cross-examining in his trial. And the guy's going, "Oh, we did this experiment." And Dinshaw goes, "You're using a diffraction grating. That's a fraud." I'm thinking, why did he say that? Right, because the diffraction grating is a bunch of lines, right? You're not really dividing light. You're creating a system of, basically, fringes or line edges and stuff. So you sort of have, in order to really understand this, we probably can't get into too many technical details here. We'll have to work out this Hangouts thing and figure out ways that I can put the pictures up and we can kind of describe a bit more of this so people can go do these experiments themselves. It's not hard. You track down a prism. I've got this book here, which I believe is still available. I don't know if it's in print, but I'm sure you can find it. The Rediscovery of Color by Heinrich Proskauer. And this book here, this book comes with, I used to sell this at Borderlands. This book comes with a series of cards that you look at through a prism. So you start with like this one, and you look through a prism of that, like Goethe did at the wall. And what you'll notice is, as you move it around, the color, there's no color where there's white, there's no color where there's black, there's color where white and black meet. And then it progressively takes you through and reduces it down, to the simple where it's at, and you can go back and forth. And
so that's a very important point, is that according to Goethe, color only is formed at the borders, at the edges where darkness and light meet, right?
Right, because you don't see light. Light's clear. You only see where it strikes. And those are some of the lectures that I had gotten through Rick Mansell that I listened to the tapes on, were like Steiner's lectures on light and color effects on earthly bodies and things like that. But see, this opens up a much larger picture because, and this has pretty much never been published or put out in an organized form, but back in 1987, when I first really got into this, I did, yeah, there we go. See, that almost shows it correctly. Yeah, the green's kind of coming off a bit further out because it's tight.
But however, that's not true, right? Like
yeah, the green usually comes. That was close. The green wasn't coming directly, but it was hard to really. But what I started thinking about the atmospheric color. I go, okay, well, if there's got to be something more fundamental. Ernst Lehr's proposed an experiment where you can easily demonstrate this. In fact, maybe we can set this up and show this on. I have to get proper containers and stuff. I'll have to talk to a chemist friend and figure out what we can use as a media. Yeah, see, like that. That's definitely not how it works.
Okay.
That's the false view, but you find that in science books. I mean, that's what everybody's taught and believes.
Yeah, that's what always comes up whenever you search for prisms. It's hard to find something that's right,
Exactly. It's funny because I was selling books at a Whole Life Expo out in San Francisco years ago, and these three guys came walking by a table and looked down, and I had some books there on Goethe's theory of color, and this guy starts going, "Now," he goes, "What are you, an idiot?" He goes, "This stuff was disproven years ago." I go, "Really?" He goes, yeah. He goes, that the Goethe stuff. This is all nonsense. He's just a poet. I said, hey, I got a prism right here. Why don't we do some experiments? This guy turned red and like started calling me names and ran off. And his two mates are sitting there looking puzzled. They go, wow, what just happened? I go, I don't know. I go, what does that guy do for a living? And they said, oh, he's an optical scientist at Lawrence Livermore Labs.
Oh, those
Right?
guys.
His characterological structure was threatened,
Yeah,
by
it destroyed
information
his
in
whole world.
belief system. Yeah. They call it science, but it's not, right? It's a characterological structure system that, if you go outside of it, they freak out, which is true of society as a whole. That's why Wilhelm Reich's work is important, not only the independent characterological structure of individuals, but also sort of the mass psychology of societies.
Yeah,
And
listen,
how they're
little man,
engineered.
listen. He described it very well in that book.
Oh, exactly. The mass psychology of fascism, which is a bit harder to find, things like that. And of course, people at the top, they have to have a stock institute and stuff. They play with society
So,
as a whole using those ideas.
Tom, I'm really curious as those experiments that we can do if we just buy a prism, like how can we prove it to ourselves that what Newton is saying is wrong? Because they're saying that that white light produces all the other colors, right? And we know that to be wrong. I believe modern day optics even concedes that's not exactly true. However, that it persists. So what experiments can we do to prove to ourselves and to all those naysayers around us that Goethe was right and Newton's optical theory was not?
Well, I think, reading through something like Man or Matter, because he explains it quite well, and just get a prism. Sometimes they're easy to find, sometimes they're hard to find. They're not too hard to find in the States, and I'm sure they're easily found online. Edmund Scientific or something. There's a wide variety of places you can probably find them at. And even that book, The Rediscovery of Color, that comes with a small prism and those cards, so it's a complete set. So if you can track that book down, I'd like
Theory of
somebody to read
colors.
that book. Yeah,
By Goethe, yeah.
I've or even Goethe's Farbenlehre book itself, which MIT Press did it. But to make sure that you don't get confused, they tell you right on the back cover that it's been disproven. So you know that before you read it.
So wait, I've read I have his theory of colors. I never finished it, but there's another book. What is that book called? The Farbenlehre?
Oh, that's just a German name for his book.
Oh,
Right.
okay, okay, great.
So that was just the MIT. That was probably the edition I've got somewhere here on the bookshelves. So anyway, but the experiment that I was mentioning. So in order to see how it's formed, so basically you need a light bulb, a glass cylinder that you can fill with water, and a black card, and something to mix in the water that'll make like a colloidal suspended medium that'll sort of create an opaqueness.
Like salt or something?
Salt doesn't really do it, because you need something to actually create a opaqueness. And I'm not sure. Flour kind of clumps. I've actually been looking for something because I hadn't thought about it a while. I thought I should actually get this one together and do it.
Maybe
because
cornstarch or something like that, or no?
I thought, but it clumps. I actually tried that once and it kind of clumped on me. But
Something that does not clump. Okay.
yeah. So it wouldn't be too hard. I just hadn't thought of it in years, and I never did the experiment. Well, I tried to do it in the big way. I was going to do the experiment. This is what happened. So I started out, and here's what the experiment is. It's real simple. So you got a thing of water, and you put the light bulb behind it. So you're looking at the light bulb, and of course tungsten filament. It's got a slight yellowish to it anyway, right? Because it's. But nonetheless, as you start filtering the water in, you start making the water more opaque. It goes from yellow to it starts getting more yellowish as you gets the opaqueness in there, but then it goes from yellow to red. Just sort of like the setting sun. As it goes down, it can go orangish, goldish, depends on the atmospheric conditions. But the other side too, to show the polarity and that it's not just light scattering, is you put the black card behind the cylinder and you put the light on the side shining into the water. And at first you just see the black, but then you start mixing your colloidal medium into the water, and it starts looking blue. So basically you can create the blue. So basically when we look at the sun, right, the yellow part, what we call the sun, because to me they're both the sun. The yellow part that's light coming through darkness, and the blue is darkness coming through light. So anyway, I said, okay, well, I really want to do this experiment properly. So I called up NASA and I said, hey, what's the dominant spectra of the sun in the optical wavelengths above the atmosphere? I said, I'm doing a research project in atmospheric optics, and I was just kind of curious. And they go, oh, we don't have that information. I'm going, yeah, look, you guys been up here like 25 years. You're kidding me.
You're the only
None
guy
of your
with the
departments have it?
balls. You're the only guy with the cojones to call NASA.
Oh, hey, anybody can call them. It's public servants, right? So anyway, I actually got onto a gentleman in the Johnson. I called around a few places, Johnson Space Center, public relations. I got somebody who actually got quite interested in it, and he became a good contact for quite a while for me there. And looks, I'm saying, well, how about stars? Anything? I said, could I get like a white? Just like, give me a white light photo of the sun, so I can use it as an experimental reference. Just so because we know what the sun looks like here. I'm just like trying to, I got to do it. Nope, no white light photos of the sun in space. Stars, nope, none of that stuff. Well, what do you got? So they send me all these like pictures of stuff that was taken in absorption band filters. So if you look at like absorption, you look at the spectra of the sun, you see those little lines, your hydrogen lines, calcium lines, ferric lines. They need to take one of those. They need a filter in a very precise wavelength of that dark line in order to image the sun in space. And they told me that, well, this guy, he put me on to this guy who worked in the photographic department for like 25 years. And because he had left NASA for private practice. He's an elderly guy, so he could talk. And he told me that, he said, yeah, it was a big puzzle when they first went up. Alan Shepard, John Glenn, because space was black. John Glenn saw his fireflies around his like capsule, but overall, they weren't sure what was up. So he said they started developing these optical gratings. He said, but he didn't know where that project went. He said, because everything got compartmentalized. So anyway, so in the process of, so that's looking, that picture there, if we can see it on screen, is we're looking at the sun, and those are extreme ultraviolet specific frequencies, 171 angstroms and stuff. I can't remember all the numbers off the top of my head. But anyway, I like to double check. So I called Naval Research Labs up in Washington, and I got like their solar research department. So I started asking the gentleman there about, I said, why can't you see stars in space? I'm trying to figure this out. And he's going, well, who told you that? I go, NASA. He goes, oh, is that them boys down at Goddard pulling your leg? I'm going, no, it's like public relations at Johnson Space Center in Houston. He goes, look, I don't know why they tell you that. He goes, that's just nonsense. He said, look, here, he said, my research partner has been up in space, John Bartow. He was up on Skylab, and he was up on the first Challenger flight. So anyway, I get John on the phone, and he's going, look, he said, I've been up in space. He said, the stars are brighter in space than they are on Earth, and they don't twinkle. I go, cool. No, I really appreciate that. It makes sense. I go, I didn't tell him I'd been spend 6 months with NASA. There's a bit more to that whole story too. Other people like contradicting me and going back to them, which I'll throw in a second. But to finish this one, so anyway, I call back my contact in NASA, Mike, and I'm going, hey, I just talked to an astronaut, and he told me that when he was up in space, he said the stars were brighter on Earth than they don't twinkle. And he said, well, he's a trained observer, and he accurately reported what he experienced. He said, but the information we've given you is absolutely correct. So anyway, I put 2 and 2 together, and I figured, well, obviously by the time of Skylab and stuff, they had developed the optical gratings, right, or whatever special imaging system that they needed. So they pretty much had it in there. But if you notice, you never see pictures of the star. All those years, the space shuttle was up there. They were like, go, hey, look, there's like the moon over there. look at Venus. Look at Mars. Hey, yay, we're up in space. Look at all this cool stuff out here. Did they ever show you that stuff? You just got to think about it. Go, well, now on the International Space Station, they're finally showing you pictures of stars from space. But it took them long. It took them like 50 years. Like start showing pictures of stars from space. So everything's all filtered. People go, "What about the Hubble?" I go, well, "Yeah, that's reflected surface because you can see the sun." What this guy told me is that the sun, you couldn't see it. He said they were ordered not to look at the sun. But obviously, they're in a little tin can flinging through space. So what can you do? He said, but see, he said the early guys reported it looked weird. It was almost like the sun was appearing on the window, and that they could see through it to like this sort of darker, like reddish brown sort of body.
Reddish
Almost
brown.
sort of what you see in like the hydrogen alpha sort of photos of the sun from space. The hydrogen alpha line absorption band filters, it's kind of a reddish mass, and you could see it. And of course, NASA did get me some white light photos from space. The only white light photos from space that NASA could provide for me were coronagraphs, where the corona of the sun is reflected down a tube. Right, so the reflections obviously were showing up. So, people say, well, what about the Hubble? They would ask me, I go, well, remember, first thing they sent it up, it didn't work. How could you get that one wrong? But secondly, it was a reflected surface and it had an atmosphere in it. So, what I've come to realize over time is through looking at Tesla physics and things, is that I don't believe that it takes any time for starlight to travel from the star to our planet. That basically we are looking at the universe in real time. It's what we call it longitudinal transmission, same as Tesla's longitudinal electricity.
So that was a huge statement you just made. Basically, light years are bullshit. Everything is a lot closer than what they tell us it is. Much, much, much closer.
Oh, exactly. Right. Well, just stop and think about it. I mean, it's got to be, for one thing, if information couldn't travel from one end of the universe to the other instantly, the thing would fall apart. And another thing is just stop and think, there seems to be purpose in the universe. Some people think, oh, we're just, it's all just BS. First there was nothing, then just exploded, and then a bunch of rocks all clumped together, and then some gas clumped together and made these nuclear furnaces, and then lightning hit a pool of jizz, and we had dinosaurs, and now you got to pay taxes, and you be a good citizen and stuff. They don't want you to really perceive the real universe out there, because you might actually be an independent thinker that doesn't need somebody to tell you what to do.
It's amazing how ingrained that whole Big Bang lie is, because I've been going around now to various theologians and talking to them about that. And I walked into this mosque and I spoke to this imam, and he was standing there trying to convince me by showing quotes in the Quran that the Big Bang was real. And I was like, man, I have an imam trying to convince me the Big Bang is real. Am I in Bizarro World? What happened? What's going on over here? And I was trying to tell him that it wasn't. Oh my goodness.
Oh, well, I knew that, and I mean, and again, I have to say, I have to keep putting this qualifier, no disrespect, because there's so many people out there, an honest endeavor, trying to figure out what's happening in the universe. And I won't mention any names, but I mean, there's some of the great leaders out there people are following that are actually have some really good ideas and are lovely people, but they're basing everything on Big Bangs and expanding universe. And
I won't mention any names either, but yeah, we
there's a couple of them, but
yeah.
Yeah,
we need
there's
the full
a few.
and total truth, man, not just a half truth.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, and that was what I was talking about earlier, about how some people, they get a little bit of an idea, and then that becomes their whole thing. Even though they evolve past it, they keep that idea stuck there. So continuing to harp on about the Big Bang when there's so much evidence, through the electric universe people. I mean, those people, Walt Thornhill and Dave Talbot, those guys have done such a phenomenal job bringing really true, high quality, very dense, thick packs of information for anybody that wants to look. There's guys like Steve Carruthers, his stuff on the Big Bang. I mean, once you watch that, it's like, God, how does anybody even believe this stuff anymore? It's a religion.
It sounds like some banker-inspired porno, the Big Bang. Like what?
It is. It's a very sort of masculine idea, right, from the patriarchy sort of thing. But see, part of the thing is here's this other book, which it's really thick, so I haven't really read through it. and it's actually a bit more scientific than in its detail with equations, the anthropic cosmological principle. Because there is that whole concept that the universe was actually created around us in our consciousness. And
Absolutely.
there's a lot of actual evidence that points to this. In fact, they had to come up with relativity to explain it away.
Yeah.
Um,
When they get caught in a lie, they have to make up a whole bunch of new words and
oh, exactly. And as more evidence shows up, then they got to keep like patching stuff on, like dark energy, dark matter,
oh
black
yeah.
holes.
You know,
First black holes, nothing could escape it. Now everything can escape it, right? And they got
yeah,
accretion disks and this and that, blah blah blah. This whatever.
it
Even though
was
nobody's ever seen one.
it was really amazing. I was at a cocktail party on the weekend, and there was this one guy who was just stoned out drunk on scotch, and there was a theoretical physicist there, and he mentioned dark matter, and then the guy that was totally drunk was like, but wait a minute, that just sounds like the ether. How is that different from the ether? And the theoretical physicist was just trying to say, no, no, they're totally different. And the drunk guy was like, but no, no, no. Like he was in a state like a child almost, where a child is like, wait a minute, that sounds like exactly the same thing. Why is that different? He wouldn't leave him alone. The theoretical physicist got so he just left. He couldn't take it. But it's really funny how children and maybe guys who are drunk on scotch have the courage to actually ask the right questions and not stop. Like us sober adults will just say, "Oh, okay." They'll just let everyone else do our thinking for us. But there are still those that won't.
Exactly. Well, that's part of what Ernst Lairs tries to recultivate within us through his Matter book is what he calls the Hans Andersen child, right? Hey, the emperor's wearing no clothes.
Exactly.
It's like Goethe looking through the prism. He believed Newton until he took a look. But yet, here you got whole university optical departments that got like the wrong picture in their books and stuff. So we do have to go back to that sort of Hans Andersen sort of child thing because the emperor doesn't wear any clothes. Because and that's when I started getting into this stuff like the no stars in space. This what a can of worms. And I remember you start telling people this stuff, and I remember one day I was going to the post office in Northern California where I lived rurally when I was running Borderlands, and of course, I'd get like big stack of mail every day. So I was coming out of the post office with a big stack of mail, and some guy goes, "Wow, you've been away for a while." And I go, "No, this is my daily mail." He goes, "Really? What do you do?" I said, "Scientific research." And he goes, "Oh, what do you research?" And I said, "Oh, I've just been talking to NASA, they told me there's no stars in space." I swear to God, this guy looked like he wanted to kill me. I had to like talk my way. He started freaking out and he started twitching and started. Goes, "What do you mean? What do you mean there's no stars in space? Who told you?" I go, "Hey, don't worry, man. I was just like kidding. I'll see you later,
It's amazing how people like throughout. Once you start thinking this way and you start looking at, uh, for example, Nikola Tesla, he wrote a paper called "Famous Scientific Illusions."
Oh
And
yeah, love that.
basically, in that paper, he's describing how uh, the moon does not spin on its axis. It cannot be spinning on its axis, and it's really a remarkable paper because like when you tell people, "Hey, do you realize that we only see one side of the moon?" And they're
Mm,
like, "Are you serious?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, look up." And like, no matter where you are in the world, you at any time in the night, you only see one side of the moon. And then they try to explain it away like the hardcore ones, and they're like, "Hey, but wait a minute, maybe it's because it rotates at the exact same duration that the Earth revolves, so we only see that side of it at night." But then you're like, "Hey, but wait a minute, the night lasts 8 hours, right? But that whole time, it should be spinning that whole time, but it's not. You only see, it
right.
never actually deviates from that." And then like you see their faces kind of freeze.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Well, I point that out to people, right? Because they're talking about going to Mars, right? And this is kind of what I was going to get into. This is what this no stars in space. This opened up a bigger thing. So I started looking into the whole thing of. I mean, I was quite interested in the Copernican revolution. Man, my mind was quite open during that whole phase of Borderlands. And I'm thinking, right? Well, people used to believe we lived in the center of the universe, and obviously now, they figured it out. we're going around the sun. It all makes sense. But it's funny, you kind of experience it. So I read this book. It was called De Labore Solis, or Airy's Failure Reconsidered, on George Bedell Airy's experiments in parallax, which had been proposed about 100 years earlier after the Copernican revolution.
Airy also did ether experiments as well, right? Interferometry experiments, and proved the existence
Right.
of the ether.
I'm not sure if he did it. I actually got picked up a biography of Airy, but I haven't had a chance to read through it yet at a used bookstore. But basically what he did, well, this book proposes, and this was Walter van de Kamp. At the time, he was head of the Tychonian Society, and Tycho Brahe being sort of the counter to the Copernican side, with his epicycles. And the thing is I've actually realized, where both systems are correct. It took me a while to figure it out and how it actually works. Because with Tycho, he knew inherently within his body, mind, and spirit that we were in the center. Right? So he tried to explain it in the physical terms. But in the physical terms, the dominant sort of space is, we can call it the Copernican space, right? The sun appearing to go around, or the Earth appearing to go around the sun. That's sort of like the skeleton of the system out in space, just like our skeleton's buried within us. But anyway, I was reading this book, and I was thinking, this is really far out. And he does go through all the ether experiments. I didn't remember him talking about Airy doing those, but he kind of got into like Fresnel's experiments, and I can't remember Fitzhugh, and on up in Michelson-Morley. But what he points out is it all goes back to the fact that they couldn't measure any parallax, and I had to really think, what in the world do they really mean? I mean, it took me a while, because the experiment that Airy did was, okay, so Earth is going around the sun, right? Here's the sun, Earth goes around it. So you fill a sighting tube with water. You sight a tube at a star. Then you fill it with water, and you measure the change in angle, the angle of aberration. 6 months later, when the Earth is on the other side of the sun, you sight the star again, fill it with water, measure the angle change, and simple geometry, you know how far away the star is. Thing was, there was no angle change. That's what gave rise. So my understanding of Airy, and he may have done ether experiments, but the important thing about Airy's experiments is they gave rise to the whole sequence of ether experiments that eventuated from there on, because they were trying to figure it out. And it took me a while to actually, what in the world are they talking about? So I had to really meditate on it. So what they're saying is when the Earth is going around the sun, right, exactly, there you're looking at it. But fundamentally, we're looking at, but there's no angle change. Supposedly they're getting it now, but even that stuff's all kind of dubious the way they do it. But what that means is that the light is actually traveling with the Earth. So as the Earth goes around the sun, the light's traveling and following it. And that's where they got this curved space, all that sort of nonsense, right? And that's what they're trying to explain with that stuff. The fact is the light's going like this if we're moving. But I didn't know at the time about longitudinal or the no stars in space, exactly how that worked. So none of that really even matters at this point. We're actually starting to deal with a new paradigm where we're actually beyond even worrying about that sort of problem there. But nonetheless, after I finished that book, I was sitting there thinking, this guy's made a really good case. I mean, I didn't agree with everything he said, but he brought up enough bits and pieces that, for me, related into things I had read, like Matter, and other things I'd known about.
Just to get into how important what he just said is, he's saying that the light is following us around, meaning that heliocentrism would be impossible at that point. How could it? I mean, explain that.
Well, that's what relativity is about. Relativity explains that away. It's all relative. Doesn't matter where you're at, right? So
nothing is real. Like me and you aren't talking right now. If some guy is out in Guam sitting and sipping a coconut, right? Like this is not happening, right?
Yeah, well, we should be in Guam sipping the coconut, but
but that his experiment the parallax would be explained if the actual heavens were rotating above us, right? I mean, that's what that is basically saying, isn't it?
Well, that was the original point of the experiment, was to prove one way or the other. But by the time that Airy did the experiments, the Copernican revolution had already instilled itself through the common consciousness. So nobody was willing to believe it. That's why they had to figure out. That's why they started doing ether experiments. But I believe this is all coming back into a resolution through it. So what I did is I went out in my garden in Northern California. I ran a biodynamic garden up there, and I'm sitting there meditating, thinking, gee, I wonder what it would be like if we really were in the center of the universe. I go, wow, it feels just like this. Everything felt so alive. I go, I've been here all my life. But scientists tried to tell me I wasn't here. Because and that's it. Everything's an illusion, right? It's just a vibration. You don't even really see stuff. It's just like little things that go in your eye, and these little electrical signals are going up there. And
David Hume, yeah.
yeah. Hume was one of them, definitely. I mean, but even in, Kant was sort of like brought Hume forward in a sense. But then he even said that you can never really know the universal archetypes. Where Goethe penetrated straight through to the universal archetypes and showed how to perceive them.
God bless.
Because his mind wasn't clouded. Yeah. So yeah, and that was around the same time too that I was researching all of the what I call the spiritual scientific section of the Goetheanum. Lily Kalisko's work, Rudolf Hauschka. Lily Kalisko was doing the metal crystallization with like metallic salts, gold for sun, silver for moon, and doing them during different astronomical alignments and showing qualitative relationships between metallic salts in colloidal solution and planetary position, which means that stuff's affecting us all the time. Her work, I've posted some of her work online. I just scanned her book, Spirit and Matter, a Scientist's Answer to the Bishop's Queries.
So basically, Lily Kalisko's experiments tell us that astrology has real scientific significance, right?
Absolutely. We're certainly, well, even RCA did that because they did radio astrology. So what's interesting is it's both the heliocentric and the geocentric positions actually affect. In fact, so I've got a book here, another book, Planetary Influences Upon Plants. By Kranich, Ernst Michael Kranich. And what he actually shows is that, let's try an example here. This is sort of a preliminary incursion into it, showing the fundamental principles and opening up the field for further research. But I'm just going to look for some simple sort of diagrams here. But what he's showing is that the planetary positions, as they appear from Earth, are woven into the plant structures. Of course, we know this. We see the signature of Venus is actually one of the more dominant ones, the five-pointed thing. Just the pictures will show up, and maybe in future things we can scan some of these. I have used these in lectures and videos and stuff over the years. I was looking for one particular one of the dandelion puff, which actually shows the relationship between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter from the Sun. So the fact is if all these, there's a heliocentric one that's sort of what's called bindweed, sort of like the Egerias and what we call those, the morning glory type things. That's sort of like Sun Mercury pattern of, but that's heliocentric.
And each of the planets is associated with a certain noble metal, right? Like Venus is with copper, Mercury is with quicksilver, aka Mercury. The Moon is with silver, the Sun gold, iron, Mars, tin, Jupiter, Saturn, lead. Correct?
Correct, and that's what Lily did, was actually crystallize the metallic salts during different planetary alignments, and she actually showed that there's a definite relationship between the metals and the planets from their Earth-based relationships. And then you find, too, Lawrence Edwards' work and Kranich's work and others, that the planetary motions, the complex motions of the planets, as they appear from Earth, with their forward and retrograde loops, they weave into the plant world. Right, so here, on Earth, we've got this whole functioning sort of higher order space that we are in the center of, because just the plants don't have any intellect; they just react indirectly. So they'll tell you where you're at. You can orient yourself from them. They're in the center of the cosmos, as far as they're concerned. Right, there's one of Lily's. So if we're looking at this picture here, you can see this would have been a piece of blotter paper, and about 10 centimeters on a side, I think, and that would have been rolled in cylinder and put into a petri dish that would have like a metallic salt dissolved in an acid solution. And as it would rise up and crystallize, and she would do tens of thousands of these things over the years, and not only with the metallic salts, but also with minerals up and below ground, in her agriculture research. So, yeah, it's pretty amazing stuff. But what you find through these experiments is that there is an Earth-centered life force. There's a higher order space here. So both the heliocentric and the geocentric spaces are functioning. One's not right and one's not wrong, right? It's both. And there's basically four spaces, even come from the old Kabbalah, right? You had the four spaces, the archetypal, generative, formative, and manifest. So the manifest would be sort of like the the heliocentric, we'll call it, or the acentric, right? The way Euclidean space. The formative, that's projective geometric space. And that's the Earth-centered. We call that the anthroposophical space, perhaps. And then there's the two higher order spaces, which some people may have a little difficulty with at this point, as theoretical spaces or even functional spaces. And so the generative space would be what's called the geocosmos, which is because there was a lot of people that actually believed that the Earth was hollow and we were on the inside.
We're going deep right now.
I was having a chat, bro. No.
Our chats can cause some problems. We're going to get the Men in Black up.
Well, I'm just saying, but these are theoretical spaces, and if you work your way through, you can understand why people actually think these things. So it's not like that space would be an absolute space. There's a reason for it, understanding, and there's actually evidence for it and evidence against it. So the whole thing's about having an open mind. The thing is, when you look at the four spaces, you're again dealing with an archetypal structure. And this is when I say from Steiner's sort of knowledge of the higher worlds and its attainment. The higher worlds may not necessarily be functioning the way you expect in inertialistic matter at hand in a terrestrial environment. But who knows what's really happening in the universe? As if it's, because quantum physicists say, because they're all the double-slit quantum God, that if you're not observing things, you're only collapsing the wave field when you look at it. And other than that, there's nothing happening behind you. And people say, well, if a tree fell in forest, nobody was there to hear it, would it make noise? I go, of course it would. I go, what are you, an idiot? It's like insects, the thing hit, it would have, of course it would have made noise. They come up with these theoretical arguments, and I think that the double slit experiment is kind of like that, right? If you're not observing it, is it still there? God, and they got universities full of these people.
I can imagine what these guys must say, when they get caught cheating on their girlfriend. They're like, "Oh no, that wasn't a real woman. She was she was, I don't know, some kind of." So these guys are like sociopaths. They just make things up.
They do, exactly. They make up dark matter. Ether doesn't exist, but we got dark matter, because it fits the mathematical gravity model where, Newton's enlightenment when an apple fell out of a tree, rather than it's funny, see, because all science, all of modern science is kind of based on Newton seeing that apple fall out of a tree. The thread that was missed was Goethe's The Metamorphoses of Plants, how the apple got up there and the fundamental archetypal structure of the whole plant.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. So basically, to explain all life on Earth, you have to explain how water can get from the tip of the plant root all the way up to the leaves. Maybe in a little basil plant in your garden, that's easy, but in a 1,000 or 700 foot sequoia, that's not so easy. So, for example, like the work of Gerald Pollack, he basically says that the modern day explanation of osmosis or just diffusion is impossible. And he has his explanation in the fourth phase of water, etc. And it actually bears a lot of semblance to Rudolf Steiner and his theory of the ether, how the earth breathes, how the chemical ether comes up and down as the earth breathes, and it's in sync with like the morning. That's why you get the morning dew in the morning, because
Exactly. That's the chemical ether pulling in.
yeah, exactly. So, the modern science cannot even explain how the simplest possible thing, how water goes up plant roots at all. It can't do it. You can only find those explanations in like the etheric theory. So right there, they can't explain that at all, and they don't even really have a theory of gravity. Like when you ask people what gravity is, they mention the apple falling on his head, and some loose thing about pulling. And can you talk about that a little bit? Just give us some more clarity on that.
All right. Yeah. Well, there used to be what they called the levity force. That was actually understood. Gravity and levity, right? And that comes from the old earth, water, air, fire, right? Earth was basically, ponderable cold. That was gravity. Fire was sort of imponderable hot. That was levity. So it's real simple. I mean, you just take a wooden match and light it and look at it. Look at it sideways, and some of it's falling up and some is falling down, right? What's falling up? The stuff's falling up, man. It's got like color, shape, force, energy. You put your hand there, it hurts. I mean, it's powerful stuff. Falling up, we'll call it, to misappropriate the term fallen, just to make our example here. And, what's left is, just some carbon, black carbon, the earth element, according to Rudolf Hauschka. So the carbon just holds the ether, and so we have the levity force, and Ernst Lehrs goes through this quite a bit. He uses the Solfatara, which is outside of Naples, Napoli in Italy, which is a volcanic region there, and there's basically bubbling mud pools and all that, similar to I guess what you see here in New Zealand at Rotorua and up in the States in Yellowstone and stuff. But here you can actually do experiments, and he discusses it. And what's interesting is if you hold a bit of like a burning piece of paper or a torch or something over one of these bubbling pools, it increases the output of the pool. But not only does it do that, it increases the output of the whole field, right? The whole field starts acting, right? Because you're in. So he discusses the levity field, and how. So what we say things, hot air rises. Well, it's the same as cold things falling, right? Cold things fall, hot things rise. In that sense, unless they have too much density. But so you have a polarity. Everything's polarized. That's what I was saying earlier. The electromagnetic spectrum is an incomplete sort of version of things because it assumes everything's just in a straight line of vibrations, whereas if you get into light and color, you obviously got polarity. So you have these spheres of dynamic activity, and one of the primary polarities is levity. So levity force, which functions through the coming out of the sun through the light ether, literally sucks the plants out of the ground. The force is pulled up because it's alive. And I suppose it's the simplest sort of explanation I could do off the top of my head. Only because my mind's kind of distracted by what you said, because I've just watched this other interesting thing. I've been watching a bit of stuff on mushrooms and mycelium. And because when we see a mushroom at the top of the ground, that's just like the fruiting body, when things propagating. The main body is actually this like neural network, almost like internet underneath the ground, which is actually taking minerals out of rocks and moving them over and putting them into the plants and stuff. So not only is the water getting pulled up, but there's actually, through most plants, in an established sort of organic sort of setting in forests and whatever, there's a direct relationship between the mycelium and the trees. Trees aren't just pulling the roots aren't just pulling their nutrients out of the ground, the minerals. The mycelium are taking them out of like the ground and putting them into the trees. And then the levity force is sucking up. So the whole thing is, the tree's not an individual. The tree's part of this whole entire organism that we're part of. The Earth is an organism in that sense. You look at in different ways, kind of build yourself up. You got like the group souls. If you look at like an ant hill or a beehive, and an ant hill is a single ego, right? It's just got one queen, it's got one central processor. Same with the beehive. And Steiner mentions that in his lectures on beekeeping, where he speaks of how the bees, by the angle of of their wings where they flap them, it maintains the temperature of the hive. So the warmth ether is the ego, right? Because our temperature goes too high or too low, we lose our ego, right? Because we die. We either freeze or fry. And then we go back to our example of the match. The warmth ether weaves and binds organic substances, and the other ethers sort of bring the life and activity into them. But when organic substance, when the warmth ether is released, then we see fire, and the warmth ether is returning back to the cosmic periphery, so to speak, which I think functionally on the planet probably operates around the place of the what they call the thermosphere. Now, I'll have to qualify. Some of these ideas I'm throwing out are sort of ideas that really need a lot more research. I've just been trying to put together sort of general principles and understand how things fit together. Because of my understanding, or I would say, enlightenment of the Goethean color theory and its relationship to sort of like Tesla physics and Dinshaw spectrochrome, I see this fundamental archetype operating through all things. And again, even if we look at the 4 primary colors, the red, yellow, blue, violet, those directly relate to the 4 ethers in their functioning. So the color bands that appear are just sort of one example of how this archetype manifests if we observe it. So like in plants, because you mentioned that, we're just talking about the rising, but the plant itself goes through metamorphic stages, right? You got the seed, the shoot, the stem, the leaf, and the flower. So seeds, obviously, right, an archetype, we'll leave that there. So we got like the shoot, which the shoot's none of the above, right? The shoot is actually a unique little bit that comes out of the seed and starts the root and coming up. Then so we got like the stem. And the stem grows for a bit and then stops, creates like a node, then a leaf comes out. So, I mean, the stem's not a leaf. Obviously, something happens. That's like a metamorphic stage. It's not gradually growing out. It's something new pops out. And then as the plant goes through these stages, it reaches like its culmination, and then it flowers. And the flower produces the seed. Right? So the whole intent of the seed is to produce the fruit or the flower, which is then, as we know, gives us sustenance, gives us color, gives us essential oils, our medicines, everything. Everything we need is in the plant world. We don't need the synthetic oil-based chemistry. What Rudolf Steiner, not Rudolf Steiner, but Rudolf Hauschka, showed was actually sort of a mirror realm, coal tar chemistry, which has sort of taken over the world. So if you do sort of like graphs of homeopathic dilutions and he shows that, Rudolf Hauschka shows that in his book, The Nature of Substance. Rudolf Steiner Press does that one, may still be in print. But if you look at activity graphs of homeopathic substances through successive succussions or dilutions, you get different activity. Okay, I'm looking at the picture there.
Yeah.
But so anyway, what he did is he took natural benzoic acid and synthetic benzoic acid and showed that the natural benzoic acid actually had a potency curve depending on the different potencies it was succussed to, whereas the synthetic benzoic acid didn't have any. It was flat all across, right? Because there's no life in it. So look at our Earth here. I mean, it's just all this plastic that's coming up. Plastic, synthetic materials. What are we doing to this planet? The good thing is, I found out, is I realized that going through some of this information on mushrooms, is that mushrooms can actually break down this hard plastic and get rid of radiation and stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing. They can actually break down plastic and oil, like all this waste. Mushrooms can actually do something with it. It's amazing, isn't it?
Right. So even if our civilization destroys itself because it doesn't wake up in time, the mushrooms will probably sort stuff out in time for something new to come around. We hope.
You
Yeah,
know,
maybe more evolved.
if we could get back to the four ethers and give people just a
Mhm.
little synopsis on that, because no, most people aren't familiar with that. They're just familiar with the ether. But Rudolf Steiner had his own model of the ether, right?
Oh, definitely. And well, basically, I would say it is a single ether that breaks down to four types of motion or four types of activity. So they're all. And I did a video about 2 years ago called Quaternity, which is on my YouTube channel, where I tried to actually show the relationship between the elements and ethers. Um, so, like we know, we have the elements. Got earth, water, air, fire, which are more than just states of matter. They're dynamic realms of activity within the material sort of realm. Um, but then related to those are four ethers. So related to the earth element, we have the life ether, which is interesting. So life appears in like the most dense of matter. And then we have in the water ether, in the water element, we have the tone or chemical ether, which is, of course, the structure for that. And in this, quaternity that you're showing on screen here, I actually show the relationships between all these and probably describe them in better terms. A picture tells 1,000 words. It's so much easier to show the pictures, and I wasn't prepared with all my pictures on this, so we'll review this material in the future, and we'll get all the pictures lined up, so it's real simple to go through.
Yeah,
But
I think
anyway, so
a presentation just on the four ethers would be awesome. But yeah, a great summary now would be awesome.
exactly. So we have earth element, life ether, water element, tone or chemical ether, air element, and light ether, and we have warmth, the fire element, and the warmth ether. But the fire element and the warmth ether are considered like a Janus-headed connector for organic materials. It's what binds things together. So in essence, you have four elements and four ethers, but it creates 7 steps. So there's like a 7 and 8 there. It's a curious little thing once you see how it is. And I mean, even though I've got a general idea and I've looked at this stuff for 25 years, but there's still so much to learn. I'm still rereading Man or Matter and going, wow, how come I didn't get that last time? There's
So,
um,
so a
yeah.
good,
So I'm
just very simple thing is like, according to Rudolf Steiner and his student had a book, Etheric and Formative Forces in Earth, Cosmos, on Man, which he provided free, by the way. He associated a color and a shape with each ether. Like the warmth ether was this circle, like a circle shape, and it was red, right?
hmm correct.
And I'll go through this screen here, and then the light ether was triangles, right?
hmm
Triangles, and it's yellow, and the chemical ether is half circles, and it's purplish, it looks like, or bluish, blue, and the life ether is purplish and it's square.
Correct. Those are the basic sort of forms that they take in nature as they act in their primary. Although in interactions, they can also, what would you say, they combine to create other sort of ideas. Um,
Yeah, so
I'm
it's a
just,
deep topic. We can't go into it now. I think, we would all love a more formal presentation on that, and watching Quaternity would be a good first step. But I just wanted to give people a little synopsis of the ethers, because most people have never heard of that.
oh, exactly, exactly. So what I'm trying to do here is, let me see, I'm going to try and do a share screen thing here and see if I can actually show. Oh, okay. So, full screen one, Google Hangouts, Google Chrome. Oh, I see how to do it. Hold on, let me see. I'll put over here on this screen, and let me try it now. Okay, can you see my picture I put up? Because I don't see it here. I screen shared it, but didn't show. Are we frozen? Yeah. Okay, I'm back. Are you there? Because I froze up for a bit there when I tried to screen share. So what I'm going to do is, okay, now that picture I just sent through might actually give you some ideas. There we go. These are the shapes that I developed for the ether. Um, what we have on the left, lower left, we have the warmth ether. Above that, we have the light ether. Over on the upper right, we have the tone ether or chemical ether, and the bottom left, we have the life ether. And I show us some relationship to basically the structure of light and color. Because overall, the light ether is dominant, because that's where it kind of all comes out of. So I sort of developed this diagram out of Dinshaw's work, Goethe's work, and Rudolf Steiner's work. So it was a meditation diagram.
It's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing. So the green is going up and the magenta is going down, two opposite poles of each other. And they're very special, right? The green and the magenta.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Well, like in the spectrochrome system, the green rules the head, the pineal and pituitary gland system, and our physical functions. And the magenta, rules sort of our, sexual organs, sexual functions in the heart, right, coming from the other end. So you've got these like two sides, connecting. And
so there's a little controversy around in like modern optics where they say magenta is not its own unique color or something, like just a mixture of other colors. But according to Goethean theory, magenta is its own color, correct? Or
green's just a mixture of colors too. Of course, they're both mixtures. Green is a mixture of yellow and blue, and magenta is a mixture of violet and red. They're both secondary colors. It's a secondary polarity within the primary polarity of the two color bands, red, yellow, blue, violet.
okay, so magenta is in some circles considered like the etheric color, or is something special about it. It's always been the color of royalty, right?
Right, definitely. Although kind of purple, but purple's even, well, according to Dinshaw, purple's sort of still over to the right of magenta, and scarlet would be over to the left if you put like all 12 colors around. And
Okay. So
and see, that's one thing you notice too, is a lot of people, like when they go to like violet, they actually put purple for violet, right? But the purple's actually off because violet's basically the deepest sort of blue side.
absolutely.
So yes, magenta and green are polarity of each other, right? Modern science doesn't admit that, right? Because they got their linear electromagnetic spectrum, so you can't have dynamic spheres of activity, if you got a linear electromagnetic spectrum. So that's what I consider the electromagnetic spectrum is sort of like it's a dark road drawn through these like dynamic spheres of activity. I remember years ago, this amazing gentleman, Larry Spring's electromagnetic spheres. I think if Larry's still alive up in Fort Bragg, he's an amazing man. Did a lot of experiments with ping pong balls and antenna dishes and stuff, just showing that electrical waves sort of propagate in spherical forms. which of course makes sense because it's propagating in the chemical or tone ether, which is our circular sort of thing. But remember, Larry came up to visit me in Northern California, and I was showing him some of the stuff, showing him some of the weather engineering tubes we had to the geometric orgone accumulators, and an orgone accumulator that you could sit in, feel the warmth streaming in off the walls. And he's going, "Hey, you're losing your poster there behind you."
It fell off.
That's
I was
funny.
trying to share. I was trying to share something with you, and I just wanted to bring this up because basically it stops where red and magenta end. They don't actually. I'm sorry, it stops where red and purple end. It doesn't actually show the magenta. The magenta is like not shown there because it's on either side. So it's not
Right,
represented into.
right, because it's a circle of activity, not right, because it's not in line like that. So if you find that like sort of turquoise and purple have the same wavelength as well. If you look at the way that this is according to Dinshaw, and I say, well, working with Mark Fisher on the spectrochrome, which it's taken a long time to bring the new version forward, just because there's been very little interest in cash available for it, because it's almost more of a pure scientific thing than a commercial thing.
Oh well, I'm sure we can
And
change that.
yeah, but we've actually, I mean, I believe the preliminary evidence we've seen from our spectrographic analysis of the old Dinshaw tune slides is that the green and magenta are basically the same
So
wavelength.
we have a question from one of our listeners. They want to know, where does orgone fit in all this? It's never really mentioned. Orgone.
Okay, well, the orgone is basically the ether. So we'll look at the orgone, right? It's got, what are its properties? It's got optical properties. It's got warmth properties. It's got life properties. It actually has kind of all of the properties of the ether, but fundamentally it's like blue, right? And operates in the atmosphere in like what Reich called the Christ violet, right? The corkscrew waves, which you can actually see the patterns in clouds. You see the corkscrew through the clouds once you start seeing them. So functionally, most appropriately, if we were going to pin it to the chart, we'd pin it to the chemical or tone ether. Although it does contain other properties in there, it does have its thermal and optical properties, but being a higher ether than those, so there it is. So and that's what Trevor Constable worked with, was that basically the tone ether is the orgone, and Trevor did decades of pioneering weather engineering work, atmospheric healing work, and bringing rain. Using basically Steiner's concepts of the ethers through Günter Wachsmuth's etheric formative forces presentation, sacred geometry, and Reich's orgone. And interestingly enough, when Trevor really kind of went cross-disciplinary and started showing the relationship between Steiner and Reich's work, College of Orgonomy kicked him out and started vilifying him and stuff. He became a bad man because Steiner was a mystic. And
So when
Trevor.
they made the connection between those two, between Reich and Steiner, he was ostracized and
Oh
excommunicated.
yeah, yeah. You should read. Jerome Eden wrote a review of Cosmic Pulse of Life, which actually was really good because that turned a lot of people on to Reich and Steiner and Drown, and I found an incredible book. But Jerome Eden, in his review of the book for the Journal of Orgonomy, because Trevor makes some comment in there that this isn't magic or mysticism. It's like this energy is as real as a punch in the nose. So they're going, oh, well, that means he really just wants to punch his reader in the nose, because mystics are like, sadomasochists that have gone too far, and that sort of convoluted sort of, Reiki and psychotherapy that, derived off of this stuff. Yes. Yeah, so that's what you have to, I always appreciate the cross-disciplinary people. If they're only into one sort of thing, there's always a bit of a worry that their characterological structures can get upset at some new information. So
Yeah, and Reich himself paid the price. He died in federal prison, escaped from Germany after the rise of National Socialism, and then he comes to America and gets thrown in jail and beaten to death. So bad.
exactly. Well, he wasn't beaten to death. They were experimenting on him. It was mysterious. I think that they got him on some medical testing thing or something like that. They appealed to a scientific side and probably poisoned him. It's hard to know exactly what happened. But he went to jail. I mean, if you read his paper, he did a brief. It was published as the discoverer of the life energy versus the hoodlums in government, and it was part of his brief to the court. And he's just basically saying, look, he said he's experimenting with life energy. He's not hurting anybody. He's not harming anybody. This is pure science. The courts have no jurisdiction in science. But courts don't like to hear that stuff, because they're all corrupt. And in fact, the very fact that the courts exist in the form they do is a corruption of the system itself. Even if you might find on rare occasions an honest judge, speaking from someone who spent years in court, I have seen a couple honest ones, but they're few and far between, and they don't let them hang out too long on your case if you're really going somewhere. So unfortunately, Reich, died in federal prison, but did monumental work in showing this living biological energy.
So,
and I mean, not only did he show it in the atmosphere, and through cloud busting and weather engineering, which Trevor brought forward, but he also showed, and this will directly relate now to our ether. And I was talking about the life ether residing in the earth element. Well, if we look at Reich's bion experiments, there's a perfect example of proving it, where Reich would take like sand, autoclave it, I don't know, hundreds of degrees centigrade, it's totally sterile, and then he would actually culture like protozoa and stuff off of him. At first they'd be getting like these binous vesicles, so it would actually burning their eyes, or getting like sunburn of their eyes from like the UV light was coming off these sort of things that were coming out of totally sterile solutions. If you follow that, because I remember there was a guy back in the late 1800s, I think his name was Bastian, right? He wrote a book on, a big, thick 2-volume thing on spontaneous generation of life. So, I mean, if you look at like rocks, if you look at like algae and stuff, and mosses coming off of rocks, potentially, according to this theory, those things would be coming out of the rocks themselves. It's sort of like binous spontaneous generation because of the degradation of the material.
yeah, that was one of Reich's greatest discoveries, his bion experiments, right? He would put a metal in the water and he would see uh, these little things, didn't know what they were, these little bodies, and they would just start forming around and moving in this something that looked like Brownian motion. It was actually explained away by saying it was Brownian motion, but that
Well,
didn't hold
Brownian
true.
motion is orgone.
Say that again. Brownian motion is
Brownian
orgone?
motion is orgone motion. Yeah, it's like, well, it's not some mechanical BS. They're looking. I mean, look. Have you ever seen Brownian motion? Just look at it. Somebody's actually done it microscopically and look at it. You can see this pulsating living stuff.
So what are those bions? Where are they coming from? And like, are they actual? They would actually clump together and form bigger units. Like they're almost
Exactly.
like the building blocks of life.
They are the building blocks of life.
Well, so little work has been done on this. It's like one of those most suppressed areas of it really, to me, seems like his most suppressed discovery. I mean, aside from all the other amazing stuff he did,
Oh, exactly. Yeah, because it's fundamental to everything, right? Because you don't have like lightning hit a pool of jizz and evolution and all that sort of stuff, right? You got a whole different sort of universe
so he's just putting
happening.
metal in water, and he's seeing these little bions form.
Oh no, he wasn't putting metal in water. He was basically, he was autoclaving sand, things like that. So
It has to be an
that
organic compound, or
no sand.
they're just silicon.
Yeah. He was just taking like beach sand and autoclaving it. It's been 25 years since I've read up on those things. I can't remember all the details, but that's fundamentally what it was. People are probably making videos on it these days. There's such a vast field of endeavor.
It's very interesting. Was Gerald Pollack, his work? He puts like an organic substance or a carbon-based substance, or even some metals or materials like naphthalene in water, and he sees this field of he calls it easy water, the exclusion zone. It's like this gelatinous form of water, like the white part of an egg, and it's negatively charged, and it forms like this thin film around the substance, and it's very different from the water around it, just the normal water, which he calls bulk water, which is usually positively charged, and the exclusion zone can grow via light. I'd be very interested to see if little bions are forming inside that exclusion zone. It all comes back to, it sounds to me like how plants make, you know, energy and synthesize mass as well, right? Like plants have to synthesize mass. Like where are all those apples coming from? They're all coming from the
Oh,
ground.
exactly, exactly. Oh, totally. I mean, that's it. I mean, you see a spontaneous generation of life everywhere in the natural world. It's just science because they didn't figure it out in their line of thinking. They say it doesn't exist, but obviously it's everywhere. Um, so yeah, well, so we should get. I'll get some more stuff. See, we've got a lot of things we can talk about as we delve more deeply into these and kind of focus in on certain. So if we know we're going to talk about a specific subject, I'll get out my old notes and pull out the books, and we can sort of focus in. Because we could talk for days on this stuff. It doesn't.
Yeah, I kind of like these fireside chats. That's kind of what it what it is. You know, we're jumping around all over the place, but yeah, this has been awesome. I think yeah, we focusing on a few core subjects would be great. 'Cause I know people want more and more from you. So, if anyone has any questions or want us to focus on anything we spoke about today, just put it in. But I really look forward to more and more of these talks with Thomas Joseph Brown.
No, that's cool. We should do this at least once a week. Just to keep it going. And I'm cool if we want to do this and like let people know on Facebook and stuff, and have other people sort of join in, put questions in, and so maybe we can do like a little bit where we don't take any questions and get through it, and then let people sort of respond and see where that sort of goes. So no, I'm good. I like doing this. It's time. So I
Oh,
have
I'm
lost your
sorry.
sound.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, uh, I, I, I really personally want a Thomas Joseph Brown expose on cosmology as soon as possible. I think that would be awesome. That would piss off a lot of people, make me very happy. So, until next time, everyone, we'll definitely let you guys know about this stuff in advance. And I think Thomas Joseph Brown will be doing his own things too with Borderlands as well. So we're gonna be pushing the truth on every front. So. God bless. Thank you again, Tom, for joining us, man. We really appreciate it all the way from down under.
Hey, thanks, Techna. I really appreciate your time, man. I appreciate your interest, and I know you just want to get the good information out. So I'm 110% with you on that one.
All right,
So
brother.
thank you.
Have a great day.
Cool.
Talk to you
Talk
soon.
soon. You too. Bye.
Bye.
Mhm.